So I'm going to offer a few words to help us start a conversation together, right? And the conversation that we're going to focus on, that I'm going to open up at least with you all, is the role that queerness, and in particular, a queer politic, has and offers us right now as a way to understand the world, as a way to assess what is happening, and a way to build a winning liberatory strategy to get us to ultimately a queer future. Now, a few words just about that quickly. So this conversation will be layered, right? Some of us will be speaking from the place of identity experience. We ask that folks bring this. I'm also inviting all of us, regardless of your identity and how you're positioned in regards to gender and sexual orientation, I am inviting all of us to take on the work and the project of understanding how our identities are used as social categories of power. I am challenging all of us to be willing to break binaries. I am challenging all of us to be willing to break up with cis heteropatriarchy and to confront these systems of power toward liberation. And I think as a queer leader, that is everyone's responsibility, regardless of how you're positioned around your personal, around your individual sexual orientation and or gender. So I think we have a unique opportunity in front of us. As terrible as this time is as open as this time is. And so we are continuing to see unprecedented crises around climate and environmental harms that humans have done, that have created several disasters that our folks are experiencing and surviving. The novel coronavirus still continues to be an issue. We're seeing the fall of protections that folks have fought hard for, such as Roe v. Wade. Simultaneously, we are also seeing representation in ways that we haven't seen in contemporary society. Turn on the TV, there's a gay person there, right? Turn on the radio, there's a gay person there. Go to the local store, there's a gay ad there. So at the same time, we're seeing representation that is creating openings for some people to begin to have conversations about LGBTQ issues. But we on this call, we are revolutionaries. We're people who are thinking about world making, right? And we are not people who settle for representation alone. And so I'm inviting all of us to be in a conversation, to think critically about what does it mean to have a queer politic, to see the world and not just binaries, to be expansive in our thinking. And as C. Riley Snort talks about, for many of us as Black folks to understand ourselves in a swamp, in a perpetual state of making and unmaking, seeing and not seeing, being and not being. And I think there's potential there. I think those spaces create the opening for us to build new ways of being together, for us to become something, right, that we've never been, for ways for us to understand issues in different ways, for us to propose solutions that have been unseen. And I think that is the potential of radical queer feminist organizing. And so I invite that thinking, and we're going to open up the space shortly for folks who are going to be bringing that thinking and addressing the questions of what is a queer politic and what it means now. How do we movement build based on that politic? And then based on that understanding as a movement scientist, what is possible now? And so I'll pass it over to, is it just us two or we have another person with us, Frank? Well, I'll pass it to you.
Gracias. Y yo voy a decir una cuantas palabritas que están uniéndose con lo que tú acabas de decir, y ayudándonos a seguir pensando en por qué esta conversación en este momento y cómo la queremos tener. Porque yo estoy completamente de acuerdo que uno tiene que estar pensando en una política queer. Y también yo estoy pensando en queer en la manera de cómo la gente vive en su vida de día a día. Porque hay mucha gente que como que ahora mismo está de moda ser queer. Todo el mundo es queer. Todo el mundo es queer. Oh, yo tengo una política queer. Oh, yo como queer. Mi comida es queer. It's like, what the fuck? ¿Qué es lo que tú estás diciendo? You know, ya es una palabra que casi la gente la están usando tanto que no tiene ni sentido ya, ¿verdad? Y para mí, yo sé que en mi círculo de amigues y con mi comunidad, nosotros decimos, hay alguna gente que todavía son el tipo de queer que te pueden matar por ser queer, de cómo tú vives tu vida día a día, de con quién tú le estás agarrando la mano, te pueden matar en la calle, que tú tienes que pensar muy bien dónde tú caminas, dónde tú vas, qué es lo que tú haces, qué es lo que tú te pones, you know, ese tipo de queer. So, también yo estoy hablando estamos hablando de una política queer, estamos hablando de una vida queer. y de gente que se identifican como LGBTQIA y más. Y yo digo eso porque hasta la palabra queer, visibilidad es importante y el lenguaje que usamos, la palabra que usamos es importante, pero hay muchos sitios que no se usa esta palabra queer y que es un debate porque queer se puede ver bien académico y que la gente que lo usan cuando regresamos alguna vez en nuestros países de origen o en ciertas comunidades, ellos dicen, no, la gente que están usando eso son la gente que han aprendido eso en los Estados Unidos. Cómo eso está centrando cierta experiencia, cuando yo voy para la República Dominicana, yo digo, no me digan queer, yo soy pata, yo soy maricona, yo soy lesbiana, díganme a mí cómo yo soy. Entonces viene siendo bien interesante de hasta aún si la misma palabra, ¿verdad? De esta política queer, de cómo se traduce o no en lo que estamos uniéndonos con esta conversación de justicia del lenguaje. Eso es una cosa que yo quería amplificar. Y también quiero todavía unirme con esa realidad de día a día, con esta política que estamos hablando, que también es tan importante y necesaria, porque para mí queer es traer lo que no está. Eso es existir en este non-binario, en este mundo que dice, nosotros no queremos ser solamente una cosa, queremos ser todo a la misma vez. Entonces, siempre es mirar lo que sea que en los espacios en cual nos estamos organizando, qué es lo que no está, qué es lo que falta, qué es lo que hace falta, ¿no? Entonces, yo pienso en maneras de la cual gente han abierto eso, sí, específicamente con sexualidad y género, pero también con religión, con las maneras, toda la manera que la gente está usando esa política para decir, yo voy a traer lo que no está, ¿verdad? Y eso también es algo que me da calofrío porque creo que ese riesgo que hemos estado cogiendo, gente que son organizadores queer por mucho tiempo con nuestras existencias, que ahora y hace mucho tiempo más y más se está visibilizando en nuestros espacios de organizaciones, pero que tenemos que tener ese cuidado con el capitalismo, que entonces cuando se ve, muchas veces es solamente para burla o para lo que pueda traer dinero, ¿no? Entonces yo pienso eso específicamente en la manera de la cual yo veo mujeres trans, por ejemplo, que si están amplificadas es o para entretenimiento y no la están cogiendo en serio, o sea, de burla, ¿verdad? O solamente cuando pueden hacerle dinero a otra persona, ¿verdad? Entonces eso para mí es parte de esta conversación. ¿Qué es lo que traemos? ¿Cuál es el contexto? ¿Y cuál es yo no voy a decir un conflicto, pero tensión en la manera que nosotros vivimos esta política queer de día a día y en la manera que es una teoría que se puede aplicar para muchas situaciones? Así que estoy bien emocionada para tener esta conversación en comunidad que creo que hace falta y que sabemos, yo sé que la tenemos en mucha forma en nuestra comunidad de familia y en nuestros cuerpos. No sé si tiene algo más para agregar, y sé también que aunque tú le pases el turno a otros, hay otras personas que nos van a ser parte de esta conversación, así que te lo paso para ti.
Thanks. So I'll just add on a comment that I think what you're saying is just so incredibly important. And then we have some folks who are going to join this fishbowl with us, and we're excited to hear their intelligence and brilliance on this issue. I think what you're saying is so important around being clear about what is the politic that we're asking people to have, and then what are people's lived realities, and who has the greater proximity to violence. So what we're seeing all over is we're seeing, I mean, this is spot on. We're seeing, and I think due to capitalism and neoliberalism, right, we're seeing a proliferation of language, of option, of perceived choice, and people are seeing that as queer advancement alone. But really, that's not. It's just an opportunity to say a lot of things. And I think there's space there and room there for us to use in our organizing work. But that alone is not liberation, right? And I blame white LGBT leadership for that, right? For thinking that language adjustments were enough, for only dealing with what appears to be liberal solutions to very real, violent, and tragic violences against folks who have a greater proximity of violence. And I think what you're saying is so important because my training and understanding and my choosing to think of myself as a radical Black queer feminist materialist is connected to those realities, right? So there is no queer politic that doesn't seriously deal with those most harmed, those most marginalized, folks most impacted, those bodies, stories, lives, and histories. And so I do think we have to reject this neoliberal, liberal approach to queer liberation that says it is just language changes alone, that says it is bathrooms only, that says it is gay marriage alone. And I am not dissing any of those advancements. I have been part of fighting for those things, and I'm married and all of those things, right? And I believe those things should exist, but those things without some of these bigger material shifts just leaves what we have now, which is a bunch of people get representation. Some people get mic time. Some people are sought and seen, but the material lives of Black trans women are still just as precarious, or the material realities of Black studs and gender nonconforming people and Black lesbians and indigenous two-spirited folks, et cetera, are experiencing just as much violence and harm as they did before those interventions. So I think what you're saying is so important. And with that point, I think we should open up and bring in our folks. We're going to talk more about those perspectives.
Perfecto, entonces invitamos a las gentes que han dicho que sí. Gracias por decir que sí, a unirte a esta conversación. Sé que algunas veces los nombres que tienen en Zoom no necesariamente pegan con los nombres que les llamamos, pero si en este momento podemos darle el spotlight. Ajá, ya veo que alguna gente está viniendo delante. Kalayo, Matice, Gia. Estoy mirando mis notas, creo que falta otra persona. No. Otra persona.
Invitation to Aneiry to also come
Aneiry.
into.
Sí, por favor. Perfecto. Aneiry, perfecto. Bueno, gracias por decir que sí, no solamente esta vez, pero siento que son gente que dicen que sí más de una vez, cada vez, y le doy la gracia por siempre poder decidir compartir su sabiduría. Es algo que es tan importante para nosotros y nuestra comunidad, así que bastante gracias. Y saben que la pregunta, la conversación completa, que puede unirse de la forma que se les sienta bien y que sea, ustedes estén activados, emocionados para poder unirse. Y también las preguntas específicas para esta conversación tienen que ver con exactamente lo que estamos hablando de no solamente visibilidad, pero liderazgo, ¿verdad? Cómo uno sigue el liderazgo o qué uno puede aprender, conocer, saber de esta política queer. Entonces, para ustedes, de la manera que se sientan llamados, la pregunta es, ¿qué es lo que es para ustedes una política queer? ¿Y qué es lo que significa ahora, hoy en día, en este mundo, sabiendo que el mundo da mucha vuelta y las cosas cambian tanto, en este momento en cual estamos viviendo? ¿Qué es lo que es la política queer para ustedes? ¿Y qué es lo que significa ahora? Y cómo uno realiza y va creando un movimiento basado en esa política. ¿Cómo se informa el tipo de movimiento que nosotros creamos? Así que lo invito que podemos ir en la orden que estamos en mi pantalla, o si hay alguien que está completamente emocionada para comenzar. ¿Tú estás hablando, Aneiry? No, ok. Está hablando, pero no con nosotros. Ok. Entonces, Gia, tú eres la primera persona que está en mi pantalla. Después sigue Matice, Kalayo y después Aneiry. Y si quieren salir de esa forma, de esa orden, está bien, pero por favor, adelante.
Sure. Thanks, Heidi. And thanks, Em, for starting us off. I really appreciate this conversation. I really appreciate this conversation. One of the conversations that I feel is just like necessary and just, in my mind, it's almost a matter of fact in terms of like, this is just what we need to talk about in order to move forward as movements. For me, the queer politic, I think from what I remember, even growing up, and also be like, for context, I had like a late quote unquote late diagnosis of ADHD and like treatment. So for like the first 23 years of my life, I wasn't treated. So I feel like my neurodivergence really, even before I knew what was up with my brain, it really got in the way in terms of like how I connected with others, how I explained like what I needed, or what I felt, what I wanted. So I coped with how I needed to. And for myself as like a neurodivergent person, as a young girl who was like exploring my gender, and also my family was homeless for about 6 years when I was in middle school and high school. So like being poor definitely impacts what's going on in my brain and what's going on with my gender. But I think all that combined, I can say it forced me, I can say it invited me, but I think what I learned from my experience and my dedication to, I think, wanting to be happy, really feeling lost and not connected to myself, but wanting the peace that I was told magically might, be possible. So me just following that, not being able to remember a lot, right? Part of my neurodivergence is like my memory was really bad. So I couldn't even like join conversations and explain my queerness. I was just like, I don't even know. Like, I don't even know how to, I don't even know. And it wasn't enough for people. People wanted more. When I started to present femininely in high school, and I was saying I was a girl, but I maybe didn't look like a girl, people wanted more explanation. And I was like, I don't have more explanation. I'm picking the clothes I want. I'm doing what I want. And it sounds really like naive and it sounds really simple, but it always felt true. So I think growing up, that my queer politic became me really doing the work of listening to like, what does my body say I need? What are those little voices that are still freaking like not letting me go and like eating my conscious as I try to like switch my code or whatever? And I think what it came down to, what I feel like I'm settling into, is that for me, my transness and my queerness and my queer politic, like all that shit really is just like my adamant choice to give it a little space before I choose anything, right? Not feeling forced to have to like do what I do or respond in what people are expecting me. And for myself, like slowing down, giving myself some choice, some space choice. I think from therapy to like my fucking scholar, like my classwork to like my work, I think just giving myself space and choice has been that little amount of freedom to show me that fuck yeah, I was right. I can go for what my body needs. I can do that shit and it feels good. And maybe people are gonna be shitty for like to me about it, right? Like I don't think my queerness has always been like the most welcoming part of me. I don't know. People code it and like, code it with whatever kind of like other things they're bringing in. But for me, queer politic is about choice, and it's about granting myself that choice that I was born with, but I didn't really know. And I wasn't really taught. I don't blame my mom. I don't know if she was taught all her choice. But together, I think we're learning. So that's a little where my queerness is born into and has formed.
And Matice, I know that you've done a lot of work around liberating masculinities and building off of what Gia just talked about this autonomy, right? So how we as radical queer folks are fighting for autonomy, right? Which is choice plus. So can you talk more about your work and how it shapes or is built from your understanding of a queer politic, right? Talk to us more about your liberating masculinities.
Thank you for that invitation. Gia, thank you for getting us started with such a beautiful share. And I related so much of it, right? I think that I came into this work around masculinity, questioning my identity, questioning this energy I had within myself, and also how to, be with myself and be with other people in a way that felt more ethical and aligned than what was modeled for me. And now, with the folks that I am working with on a regular basis, we're in this space of like defining what a queer politic is within this realm of masculinity. And so we've been talking about liberatory masculinity as a practice, as a set of values, And that, really, is an emergent lifelong practice and commitment, in a sense, like not something that you ever like arrive to and are finished with. And also, like, what are the ways in which we have to really reconcile with the binary and binary thinking within ourselves and in our relationships, if we're going to practice liberating masculinity and, like liberating our folks. And so as part of that, we've been having more conversations in terms of like our queer politic hinging on rejecting a separation from femininity as part of the process of liberating masculinity. We've been talking about how do we recondition our egos to reject patriarchy and or to reject the inner dominator. And in doing so, like how much of that really requires centering a restorative love practice, like both with yourself and with all the people that you're in relationship with on a regular basis, right? And in community. And, then of course, under all of that, the need for regular and consistent political education. Like we have a lot of folks within our community who are increasingly identifying as gender expansive, as non-binary, and as such, like myself included, like wanting to reject our relationship to masculinity, to patriarchy, and also recognizing that, like as we explore more and more gender expansiveness, like there is still a need to definitely engage politically, personally with patriarchy as it is internally manifested and as it, is exercised in our interpersonal relationships. And so I think that is how we're currently trying to queer our politic and define the ways in which we're trying to liberate masculinity.
That's great. That's incredible. And I'm gonna build off of something you said and offer a position. Folks can disagree or agree or disagree. Get me together. I'm for it. So, one of the things that you said, Matice, that I think is important is this going against patriarchy, right? Like on purpose, we are going to break up, we are going to disavow, and we're going to challenge patriarchy. And patriarchy is a system of oppression, right? So there's power inside of it. So one of the things that I think is important about our queer politic is that it's an assertion of power. So I often stay away from words like choice and options, because that's individual, right? And being Black, being gender nonconforming, female assigned, dark skin, fat, ... My quest for queer liberation is a direct struggle for power. So I think about concepts like Gia said, I think about concepts of autonomy. I think about concepts of determination because they require and they center a pathway to power. And so I'm curious, Kalayo, as I come to you, what you think about that and what's your position in your work and ... all of that with queer politic. Where you at in this?
Ooh, I see you're bringing that juice. Thank you. Yeah, I'm just so honored to be part of this conversation with you all today. Yeah, I'm taking that in. I think that there's a lot to that. I definitely am also of the queer politic of really like dismantling what we have so that our material conditions can really like rise to the level that it needs to be for our people to thrive. And I'm Kalayo, I use they pronouns. I'm with API Chaya, and I'm also a founding member of Queer the Land, both on Duwamish land in Seattle. And I also actually want to speak a little bit to how Queer the Land came to be, because essentially, a lot of us were part of different organizations. And I think it's important that like organizations can like lift up, queerness and queer leadership, but not actually directly support like the improvement of our lives, right? Like not actually support when many of us are in situations of like housing that is like in proximity to violence, in proximity to always getting like shut down. When we do, want to access or accessing power. And also this idea that like, you know, our livelihoods, like we are like sacrificing ourselves to be in these positions of leadership, yet it has nothing for our future, right? Like our futures are not cared for. And so, you know, for the land, many of us were like, oh, we like been in the movement for like 10, 15 years. And, you know, many of us, you know, queer folks don't have kids or don't have kids till later. And so it's just like taken into, what do you call it? Like people take it for granted you're just gonna be like give your whole life to this, right? But actually like what we want is to be able to dream, to be able to have families, to be able to you know, like have some nice things. And part of that, you know, is really having power over the resources, right? And so essentially like what we've had to do and really fight for is having something of our own. So for Queer the Land, that looks like having our own home, that we, you know, that we can cultivate the land, that we can invite people to, that we can grow our families, grow, you know, our movement into, and that gives us a way to really lift up our material conditions, right? Being able to offer resources for ourselves and for our people. So that's a little bit about how I come into, you know, this queer politic, like that it's not enough that we're, you know, like seen as like leaders of organizations if there is no like real future for us other than continuing to work, you know, till we're old and gray. Like I'm trying to be in the golden hour with you all, enjoying life. And I know you feel that, Aneiry, so I wanna hear from you about how you're feeling about this conversation, and how you're feeling about being in the movement, getting power right now.
Hola a todos, Aneiry Zapata, pronombres femeninos, soy parte de BLMP. Quiero que sepan de que nunca había estado nerviosa por una conversación como por esta. Esta conversación sí me ha hecho pensar desde que leí las preguntas en la mañana, sí ha dado mi cabeza vuelta y he estado aquí en el cuarto incluso consultando con mi esposo como, ¿cómo hablo de esto? Porque son muchas ideas las que están en mi cabeza y no sabía cómo sacarlas, pero creo de que ustedes lo han hecho por mí. Para mí la política queer es la inclusión no explicada. Muchas veces siento que, como lo decía Gia anteriormente, que queremos mucha explicación sobre las vidas de las personas y no solo sobre las vidas, queremos mucha explicación sobre las camas, como sobre las camas de las personas. Queremos saber qué es lo que estamos pasando ahí y qué es lo que se está moviendo. Y no puede ser trans si sos top, no puede ser top si sos esto. Y ponen demasiadas reglamentos estúpidos que no nos permiten una inclusión adecuada. Entonces, para mí es el poder vivir y no tener que explicar el por qué mi cuerpo tiene tal faccionamiento o el por qué camino de tal manera, el por qué hablo de tal manera. Muchas veces, cuando yo he posteado videos dando algunos discursos, he tenido comentarios de deberías de tener una voz más suave. Y yo, no, mi voz no es suave. No es suave y no puede ser suave, ¿no? Y creo de que cuando hablamos del cuerpo, a veces se crean competencias, no solo es el patriarcado, muchas veces dentro de la comunidad, ¿no? Muchas veces las mujeres transgénero somos atacadas por otras mujeres transgénero de a quién le está haciendo efecto las hormonas y quién se ve más femenina y quién no, y quién se viste de tal manera y quién tiene los mejores novios. Y yo digo, Dios mío, esta es una inclusión no inclusiva. Aquí no se está haciendo espacio para todos. Y ya cuando empezamos a hablar del sistema migratorio de este país, personas indocumentadas, yo soy indocumentada. Antes tenía bastante miedo de decir soy indocumentada, ahora lo puedo decir así. Sí, yo soy indocumentada. Y muchas veces las personas que tienen la documentación y son parte de la comunidad nos ven de una manera deplorable, o a veces se crea como una falsa lástima. He hablado anteriormente algunos discursos, algunos espacios en el que me negué a estar. Yo dije, yo hablé con los directores y yo sentí una falsa lástima. No sentí que estaban hablando desde la realidad, desde el entender, el por qué estamos aquí, el qué hicimos, por qué cruzamos la frontera y qué es lo que estamos esperando de Estados Unidos. Y cuando no lo entienden y no están dispuestos a entenderlo, yo siento, es una falsa lástima, no merecen este espacio. No voy a dar un discurso con estas personas, pero también estas son las personas que tienen el poder muchas veces. Y estas son las personas que están hablando por nosotros y están representando lo que desconocen. Entonces, es como que con una confusión en nuestras cabezas oye, ¿debo formar parte o no debo formar parte? Y como decía Kalayo también tenemos ese espacio para poder soñar y poder descansar. Yo siempre digo, yo, Aneiry Zapata, yo no quiero trabajar todo, no lo quiero hacer. Yo quiero tener el espacio de poder disfrutar, de poder estar en la casa y poder decir, ok, aquí voy a estar y voy a estar tranquila, no quiero, no me veo envejeciendo gritando fuera de una corte. Yo quiero de que la ley y la corte sepa que existimos las personas queers, que sepan de que estamos aquí y que nos incluyan cuando están haciendo cambios en su reforma, que no tengamos que ir a pararnos frente. Yo no quiero que mis hijos dentro de 10, 20 años tengan que ir a pararse para gritar, oígame, incluyanme, sino que yo quiero que ellos sepan que aquí están y que merecen ser incluidos. Entonces, solo cuando hablo de la inclusión queer, de la política queer, es de la inclusión adecuada y de la inclusión ilimitada, que puedan incluir a todos, si tenemos barba, si no tenemos barba, si nos dejamos crecer los vellos de las axilas, sino todo, que nos puedan incluir y podamos tener espacios seguros para nosotros.
Bastante gracia, tan poderosa, porque lo que yo estoy oyendo también es que alguna vez uno está haciendo los mismos errores que dijo Emma antes, que ha hecho el movimiento, que es que uno pelea y trata de obtener poder de la manera que la blanquedad, el sistema dice que está bien, como que tenemos una orden. Vamos a esta gente primero y después un día llega tu liberación. Y lo que estoy oyendo que de diferentes formas están diciendo es que no vamos a hacer esos errores, y cuando vemos que lo estamos haciendo, estamos reflejando y tratando de cambiar de curso para no seguir haciendo la misma cosa que no está funcionando para nosotros si no nos incluyes a todos. Así que bastante gracias por las diferentes maneras en cual hoy que cada uno de ustedes estaban haciendo ese punto y que están viviendo ese punto. Y también sabemos que queríamos tener esta conversación porque esta política queer, sabemos que no solo la gente que se identifican personalmente como queer es una cosa que esperamos que puedan practicar ni levantar, es para todos, hablando de ser inclusive, ¿no? Es algo que esperamos que la gente pueda decir, ok, ¿de qué manera existe en mi vida? ¿De qué manera no existe? ¿Cómo se está realizando en mi organización? ¿Cómo no? ¿Con quién me estoy uniendo? ¿Cómo no? Y queremos coger este momento para que todos podamos reflejar en esa pregunta, porque no queremos salir de ese espacio para esto seguir como una teoría, sino para que sea, como dijo Matice, una práctica de valores. Entonces vamos a coger unos cuantos minutitos, vamos a poner esas preguntas en el chat para recordarles qué es, pero es... como está diciendo Imara en el chat ahora mismo, que lo que está profundamente en el centro del queer politics, de esta política queer, es la noción que es para todos o nadie, sin condiciones o limitaciones, que es la política de lo que es posible. Entonces, uniéndonos a eso, a los ejemplos que se han dado, queremos coger unos cuantos minutos para que se pregunten ustedes mismos cómo estoy profundizando mi trabajo en esta política queer, aunque lo esté haciendo. Siempre hay algo que pueda hacer que uno pueda decir, En todo lo que yo he hecho, estas son las cosas que han estado un poquito más en las orillas de mi trabajo. ¿Cuál es el liderazgo que yo sigo, que es queer, trans, non-binario? Y cómo mi trabajo está reforzando y apoyando los movimientos que existen. Entonces, Loro, te voy a decir que por favor ponga una canción por 1 minuto, 1 o 2 minutos para que hagamos esa reflexión y cuando regresemos, vamos, porque veo, Imara, que tú tienes la mano para arriba, vamos a unir más gente a esta conversación. Después que cojamos un pequeño minuto para la gente reflejar en esta conversación hasta este punto y en esta pregunta. Y después vamos a preguntar que más gente se unan a esta conversación. Ok, queremos dar la oportunidad para que la gente que sabemos que a ustedes no les gusta a, hablar en los grupos, en grupos completos o enteros, que puedan hablar en parejas, pero primero queremos oír de Imara. Imara, por favor, únete a esta conversación.
Yeah, okay. So let me just lower my hand. Thank you so much for this conversation. Mara Bailey always says that in every conversation that she knows that at some point I'm going to ask what the purpose is. And it's true. And I think that one of the things that is really important about a queer politics is defining what a queer political vision is, right? What is a queer political vision? And a queer political vision inherently is a politics that's grounded in the idea that it's everybody included or it's nobody, that there are no limitations upon who matters. There's no limitations upon who can be included. There's no limitations upon the idea of political power and political relevance in society. That's at the core of a queer politics. And that's why it's inherently anti-patriarchal. the exact opposite of a patriarchal vision, which is grounded in hierarchy, right? So it's the opposite of a patriarchal vision, is a queer political vision. Because a queer political vision, a patriarchal political vision is grounded in trade-offs, is grounded in the idea that certain people have to go first. Certain people matter more than others. We can do certain things for certain people now and then make others wait. When we know that when politics is practiced that way, that inherently that's grounded in the idea and the reality that nothing's really going to change. Because we can arc out the advances between certain groups of people to the point that patriarchy is able to adapt and maintain itself. And so a queer politics is the exact opposite. And that's why it's so incredibly hard. And that's why it's not practiced. Because it's the exact opposite of the way our political system is set up. It's the exact opposite of the way in which, even in ways that people are not aware, everyone in a certain way is practicing patriarchy. So, Aneiry, when you were talking about people in the various communities to which you belong, right? Trans communities or immigrant communities, that to the degree that people are creating a hierarchy over who matters, that is an inherent reinforcement of patriarchy and patriarchal values. And it's really extremely hard. And it's so often why our movements fail, is because we end up replicating the politics of the thing that we're trying to destroy. And it happens everywhere, right? So the work of creating a queer politics is extremely difficult work. It is beyond the right words, it's beyond performance, it's beyond all of the things that we do as humans to telegraph that we're doing the right thing. It's the exact opposite of that. And it's inherently, queer politics aren't inherently trans vision. Because the modern notion of what queer politics are grounded in trans visions of what the world needs to be. And I can say that because, as many people know, but not everyone, the modern fight, and I mean modern 1969 with Stonewall, I believe, fight for LGBTQ rights started with Black and brown trans people. That's who started Stonewall. Those are the people that organized the first march, Pride March, to commemorate the action they had taken the year before. Right? So the vision of even that there is a different political vision for people who are not straight and not cis, that's not grounded in patriarchy, is the vision of trans people, and specifically poor Black and brown trans people. Because it's the vision of how we can remake society. The vision for how you can mentally remake society in a way that works for everybody. And that queer political vision, that trans political vision, was deliberately hijacked. In 1974, when white gay men took over the march and and this legacy of Stonewall, and deliberately pushed Sylvia and Star and all the drag queens that had organized and trans people that had organized the first march deliberately out. It was a deliberate act. There was nothing that was subtle about it. There was nothing that was accidental about it. There was nothing about it that was just the way things went. It was intentional and it was violent, and Sylvia never recovered from it from the rest of her life. And so therefore, the reason why the idea of queer politics replicates patriarchy is because fundamentally patriarchy hijacked it. Patriarchy hijacked the idea of queer politics, which is why people find it hard to articulate what a queer political vision is. Because it got taken off of its mooring. And why it's so easy to, when we talk about queer politics, to have it sound like it is, you know, regular political life and regular political vision, when it's the exact opposite. So that we have to understand and ground ourselves in the radicalness of queer politics and in the difficulty of queer politics and in the way in which it is grounded in centering the people who were most excluded. That's its power, right? And the degree to which we do not articulate that power, that ground those roots, honor those roots, and return to them as often as possible is the degree to which queer politics will continue to be lost. That's how you have a queer politics that can, you know, say that what I believe in the marriage fight was important because it was a fight that was picked by the right. Sometimes in life, you don't get to pick the fights pick you, so you have to fight them. That's fine. But what I do reject is the fact that 90% of all money that has ever been raised for LGBTQ movements since 1969 were raised in 5 years for gay marriage. And the minute gay marriage was won, all that money walked out the door and all that support because they said that the fight was over. That's not a queer political vision. And so that is the struggle. And if, you know, the degree to which you believe in a world without patriarchy, queer politics and the origins of queer politics and the reality of queer politics are things that you must inherently embrace, or your vision of a world without patriarchy will never be possible. That's what's radical about queer politics, right? And that's the work. So that even if you are cis, but you want a world without patriarchy, you have to embrace a radical queer political vision. And that's hard because you live in a society in which in every way it tells you that political life is the exact opposite. And that's why it's hard. So that's what I wanted to share.
Thanks, Imara. Am I good to jump in? I hope so. But you know, to Imara's point, and also to end your question around like, is a queer politic for everyone? I'm also curious if a queer politic is not just the opposite of patriarchy, but something just totally under that shit. Like, I wonder if when I think of queer politic, I think of I don't know who or where I heard this from, but the idea of the universe is in love with itself, and the universe is a bunch of reactions and actions of things that follow its like potential and like, you know, connect versus like not connect. And I think that has informed, or has like validated the beauty I see in the world, and the beauty of like, not just the beauty of nature, but also like the science of nature and the love and the hot passion of nature that has allowed life to happen. I think from there, I think about a conversation that we had, I think at one of the last convenings around, if we're trying to replace capitalism, a system with power and dollar bills as currency, the new system that we're trying to create, what is that currency if it's not going to be power, if it's not going to be money? And I think we were playing around with like, is it love, is it connection, is it life, right? There's like the value of life. Is that the new currency of a system that could actually like sustain people? So I'm just wondering because when I think of queer politics, I don't even think about naturally like humans. I can even dehumanize a queer politic and talk about like, how can I follow life that supports life even beyond humans, right? Even beyond my self as self, my self as self. I can't even say it, but like literally, like how do I think of other things other than people? And that's where I'm like, what if queer politics is not just the opposite of like patriarchy? What if it's like the sustained practice of life. And I think if it's that, then I don't think we can lose it, TBH. I think we could be manipulated and tortured and all that shit over and over for centuries, but there is something in our bodies that tell us how to go forward toward life. And I've tried to lose it, but I can't. And I have faith that that's queer politics, because that I think is easier to explain to my kid, that he already has queer politics, that he already is free, and like he doesn't need to learn anything else other than following what his body is telling him, which is definitely the opposite of capitalism, the opposite of patriarchy.
Is that
Creo que iba.
okay? I've got some questions. Thank you for those comments. I have some questions and maybe some different. So please feel free to directly respond. And maybe this is the part where it opens up to other folks to join in with us. So just two questions or thoughts. So the queer politic for everybody, I have questions about, not because I disagree with the sentiment, but I have questions about the strategy and what that means in a world where people are not horizontal. I think queer politic requires abolition of things, right? It doesn't say everything can exist, right? I don't think it's all inclusive. It is saying directly, carceral systems have to fall down. Bodyguards of carceral systems have to fall down. I think whiteness as a social identity is a bodyguard of carceral systems. I think whiteness is a bodyguard of patriarchy, right? Whiteness is what it is because it and patriarchy was getting down. And capitalism, and then here we are, we have this version of whiteness that we're fighting against. And so, not to get all like, abstract or whatever, well, not too abstract, though I can nerd out, geek out about this. But what I'm trying to get at is I think part of our challenge in building meaningful coalitions or building broad-based queer feminist movements, et cetera, is that it's actually that we're not horizontal. So this inclusion practice, I think it ends up fucking us up. Because here we are trying to be one, not one, but you get what I'm saying. We trying to be in it together, but we're actually not positioned that way. And some of our social positioning and those identities are inherently violent against us. And so I do think it requires the destruction of some of these identities as we know it. It challenges our concepts of race. I don't think if we win this queer liberation, you can't be white at the end of that, because whiteness is antithetical to queer liberation in my assessment and understanding. It's antithetical to Black liberation. It's antithetical to so many things because of how it's constructed as a social category of power. That doesn't mean everybody gonna be as melanated as me. That would be nice, but that don't mean it's gonna happen. That's not what I'm saying. I'm talking about social categories of identity. Some of them are designed to be inherently violent. That's what the categorization is, right? Racialization is violent. Gendering is violent. Socializing people to be these major identity markers are violent processes. So I think it requires the destruction of some of it. And the other part, Gia, which is a question for you, is something I find myself challenged in this movement moment, is some essentialist behavior. So I see people who have identities and they're like, because I got this identity, I know. Or because I got this identity, it is right what I'm saying. Like, I'm gay, therefore, if you don't get down with what I'm saying, it's homophobic. And I reject that. I actually think we need more than our experiences to guide us. Because if it was our love and passion alone, we would have fucking won. There's nobody more loving and passionate than my grandma. Like, I seriously think that. She would have freed us. You know what I mean? But we didn't. So it does require some of this other stuff. So I'm just had some differences, had some reactions, seeing if anybody in the chat's gonna jump in. And come on, Mara, get me together. All right, I see your hand up.
Well, I would never get you together. I would just engage you in additional conversation. I think just to answer the points that you were mentioning, you have to be very careful about the idea that our goal is to destroy things. That doesn't mean that we're not emphasizing that there has to be fundamental change in which certain structures will dissolve and go away. That sounds like it's a subtle difference, but I think a really important one, and here's why. I think we have to be articulating what we are for and what that world looks like for two reasons. One, political change comes from countless individual decisions by millions of people over time. And I think that everyone has to understand what a queer political vision is for them, and they have to figure out the hundreds of individual choices they're going to make in their lives about how to make that happen. From where they live, to where they shop, to who they associate with, to what they support, to what they give their money to. Like, it's an expansive thing of all these individual choices, right? Because fundamentally, the swell of individual choices creates the environment for the radical change that we are looking for. So first, articulating this is what a queer political vision is, and then having people figure out what they're going to do in their small individual choices all the time to make that happen, I think is really important. And that has to just be a positive vision. I don't mean positive as in like upbeat, I mean positive as in affirming something that they can see. The second thing is, the reason why I have to say that I don't want to lead with destruction, like we're going to destroy this, we're going to destroy that, we're going to whatever. Although those things need to go away. It's not even in question. The reason why is because, I've spent like, one of the things I did during the pandemic was I spent like basically a year really doing a deep dive into the French Revolution, of doing a deep dive into how you go from an absolute medieval monarchy to a republic, to a radical republic that then ends in empire and then goes back to monarchy. Like, what is that failure, right? And fundamentally, one of the reasons why they ended up where they started is because they only knew what they were trying to destroy. And that once they destroyed it, there was no affirmative vision for what they were trying to build. And so they ultimately just recreated what they had destroyed. And so to lead with, we're trying to destroy the list. And we all know what the list is, right? It's one of the things that I spoke about in Puerto Rico. Like, we can all say the 10 things that we are fundamentally against. The hard part is saying what we are for, because that's ultimately what we're trying to create. If we only say what we're trying to destroy, that's ultimately what we're going to end up creating. And that's going to be destruction. We have to have a affirming view of what we are trying to build, right? And so I think that when you say a world without incarceration, what we mean when we say that we want a world without incarceration is that we want a world where people's living isn't criminalized, right? Like, and where people can thrive. That's actually the world that we're trying to build. We're not just trying to destroy jails. And we're not just trying to get away with police. There's an affirmative vision that we have. So I really want us collectively, when we talk about these things, to really be affirming over and over and over the world that we're trying to create behind the ideas that we have of what we're trying to destroy. And that's why I think I articulated it in the way that I did about a queer politic, because ultimately for it to be realized, it has to be for everyone. We occupy this space, we occupy this land, and there's going to have to be a way in which we bring that vision about collectively. And that's what's radical, and that's what's hard, and that's why it's a vision that's even beyond our lifetimes. So that would just be my kind of corollary to your question.
Algunas veces cuando se planean estas agendas, uno dice 90 minutos para una conversación y después llegamos al final de la conversación y I'm like, coño, nada más 90 minutos, diablo, eso se fue rápido. So, quiero decir eso, que aunque esta conversación se está teniendo en 90 minutos, lo bueno del caso es que se ha pasado el último décado creando esta comunidad tan brillante que podemos tener esta conversación y que sabemos que no es solamente teoría, pero que se están traduciendo en cómo la gente está viviendo su vida y practicando sus organizaciones, que es la parte que a mí de cual yo estoy tan enamorada de esta comunidad, porque hay alguna gente que se pueden sentar y tener estas conversaciones hasta que se vuelvan azul en la cara, pero ¿y entonces? ¿Qué estamos haciendo? ¿Cómo se están cambiando las condiciones materiales para nuestra gente y más la gente más afectada por estos sistemas de opresión? Así que bastante gracias por la manera en cual yo sé que toda la gente aquí lo están viviendo. Quería decir también que lo que yo estoy viendo en el chat, bastante gracias Alexis, por ejemplo, que nos está llevando a esta próxima, última pregunta, en cual queremos que todos se unan, o contesten, o piensen, o reflejen, qué es lo que Imara preguntó, y ahora, ¿cómo se vive lo que estamos preguntando? Y vi que aquí hay una respuesta, cómo Alexis está pensando específicamente en la gobernanza basada en el consentimiento. Cuando una persona dice, no, yo no estoy de acuerdo con algo que está pasando, ¿cuál es entonces la respuesta que tiene nuestro, no solamente gobierno, pero como nuestras estructuras, nuestras organizaciones, nuestras instituciones, nosotros como gente, que creo que es lo que la gente que han estado hablando y viviendo y expandiendo este trabajo de justicia transformativa, no ha estado preguntando por mucho tiempo. ¿Cómo es que uno está incluyendo todo? Es como dice, que se oye bien. Ay, Mara lo dice, y yo, yes, vamos a incluir a todos. Y es la persona que a mí la semana pasada me hizo una vaina y yo le quiero dar un trompón. Pero ustedes me están diciendo que en este mundo nuevo no se acepta darle a la gente unos cuantos golpes. Y entonces, ¿qué hacemos con esa gente? Y la gente de justicia transformativa dice, oh, podemos hablar y pensar, no, coño, yo no quiero hablar con esa persona, yo le quiero dar unos cuantos tiros. La gente dice, no, eso no se acepta en este mundo nuevo, eso no es queer. Y hay otra gente que dice, no es queer to jump somebody, es queer, darle unos cuantos golpes, es queer. You know, tenemos estos debates, pero se están viviendo en vida real, en el momento real, en este momento, ¿verdad? Entonces, yo lo que estoy oyendo es que se necesita educación política para que las decisiones que estemos haciendo estén basadas en una educación política. No puede ser solamente algo que está basado en mi liberación o que yo me sienta bien, pero ¿cuál es la educación política que nos prepara y expande lo que estamos diciendo y hablando? ¿Cómo aprendemos de lo que ha pasado? Y también si es asequible para todos. No es suficiente que de nuevo tengamos esta conversación si estamos usando palabras que la gente no conoce, que estamos diciendo que son los más afectados por estos sistemas, ¿verdad? ¿Es asequible a todos o solamente a algunos? ¿Cómo estamos recreando la manera de cual eso se está viviendo? Esas son algunas de las cosas que yo pensé. Entonces la pregunta para la gente que con cuales comenzamos esta conversación es ¿y ahora? Y ahora, basado en lo que ustedes entienden, lo que acabamos de hablar, ¿qué es posible ahora? So, estoy mirando a Gia, Matice, Kalayo, Imara, Alexis, te pusieron aquí también, a M. Y si hay otra persona que también quiere, bueno, nos pasamos de tiempo, anda el día. Pero, déjame yo mirar mi chat, a ver si alguien me regaló a mis 5 minutos. Ok, no. Bueno, vamos a ir rápido. Si hay alguna gente que está bien emocionada en contestar eso, vamos a coger una o dos personas y después yo se lo voy a dar pasar a Maura para que continuemos con esta práctica y esta conversación con movimiento físico. Pero estoy mirando si hay alguien que se quiere. Y ahora es la pregunta para cerrar esta conversación y después, tú no vas a cerrar completamente. Matice, dice M. Yeah. Yo no sé cómo decir en español voluntold.
Yes. What am I being voluntold for?
Para poder.
Closing thoughts.
Sí.
Closing thoughts. Closing thoughts. Yes. My closing thoughts are that this was amazing. Thank you so much. I am very interested in continuing to be in conversation, I think particularly around how do we build community to support the development of our emerging queer politic, right? because I think that it's hard to do it alone. And that's been one of the beautiful things about this experience. And so I look forward to building more community to grow my politic.
Gia, por favor, y después M.
Oop, no, sorry. I thought I was just gonna take it over for the physical movement. So back to M.
I just want to thank everybody for the conversation. I found it rich. I look forward to continued struggle around it. I think that our praxis has to be iterative. So we have to be practicing these things, discussing them, reevaluating them. And I think that's part of the queer practice. So just love and power. And I have every vote of confidence that we're going to win.
Y perdón, yo sé que Alexis la trajeron a la conversación. No sabía si tú tenías algo que decir para después pasárselo a Gia. Si tenías alguna palabra con cual dejarnos antes de pasárselo a Gia.
The only thing I want to say is I'm so grateful for this conversation, and the question that I put in the chat feels like following up on the invitation of Imara specifically to shift into what does embodiment look like for us? What does it look like to, like, who do we have to become, right? In order for, in our individual lives, in our organizations, in our institutions, in order to be able to hear when someone is out of consent and to adapt, to be able to like address those blind spots. Like, we have to get good at that. And I think I would love to be in a conversation about what are the other things that we have to get really good at doing as individuals, of recognizing our impulses to shut something down, to say no, to like combat when somebody says, I am out of consent. This does not meet my needs, and I get to be seen and my needs get to be met. Like, for us to thrive, for us to have this thriving world, this vision of this thriving world that we deserve, all of us get to have our needs met simultaneously, and our needs are not in conflict with each other. So how do we get good at like trying to stay in the language of like not what we're fighting against, right? But fighting for. So how do we get good at like making more room and more space to hear needs, and to be okay with like realizing in that moment of hearing someone else's needs that this is showing a blind spot in me that I didn't know was there, and to say thank you and to make space for the needs to be met.
Lo que tú dijiste me emocionó y me asustó, así que sé que es perfectamente lo que se necesita. Bastante gracias a todos. Gia, por favor.